Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new edition of AC Extra, a chance to hear some of the great banter that occurs during the off-air segments of the Assembly Call. This is Chad from the Chat Mob. If you listen to the show on the radio or on your favorite podcast platform, you are missing out on some of the funny and often enlightening moments that are cut from the live show. If you like AC Extra, tune in live Thursday nights on YouTube to hear all of the off-air segments and to participate in the live chat. There will be no assembly call this week. Jerod gave the guys the week off for the 4th of July. Andy is getting a head start on some early bracket numbers. Coach is most likely relaxing on his front porch with his lovely wife. And Ryan's girlfriend promised me she would be handling the fireworks after what happened last year. This edition of AC Extra is brought to you by Tonsoni Tears Tissues.
It's a great thing to be a dad and have your kid get married, so...
Yes, it is, Coach. And whether it is giving a toast at your child's wedding or trying to cope with a string of 12 losses in a row, Tonsoni Tears Tissues have your back. Tonight's clip was taken from the Assembly Call on the night of June 6th, 2019. Jerod and Andy are joined by the lovable duo of Ward and Eric of the Hoosier Hysterics. Here we find out how the Hoosier Hysterics podcast got started. Let's have a listen.
Tell us the story real quick for how it came about.
Way too much time of this guy and Eric texting angrily, some phone calls, a lot of it texting. I'd be like trying to make eggs for lunch and I would like end up burning them because I had to get a point back at Eric. And it ended up being so many hours and so much aggravation and burnt eggs. I said, like, hey, we should just do a podcast. And I thought it would actually be a healthier, more productive, and honestly, a less time-consuming way to work through everything we had to say to each other about Indiana basketball, which was often conflicting.
Yeah, and the truth is it was an excuse to get together because we live in LA. We live pretty far apart from each other. We both have kids. It's tough for friends to get together in any city.
It is.
And especially in LA where you know a 5-mile drive can turn out to be like a 45-minute commute. And Ward said, "Why don't we do this?" And I thought this will be fun. And after one game, we went into his garage. We started yelling at each other. Well, we didn't yell at each other as much as we yelled at Devontae Green for some bad passes. And then we got really fortunate and lucky that AJ Moye, who lives in LA and coaches out here, agreed to be on the podcast. I ran into him.
That was the first interview, right, AJ?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I ran into him when Ward and I went back for a game we went back last year for the Louisville game.
Yeah.
And ran into AJ Moye at the game and said, "Hey, we're doing this podcast. I know you're in LA. Would love for you to be on." And he was like, "Let's do it." So we went out to his high school, interviewed him in some room attached to the gym. And
we literally put up like athletic, I think it was their wrestling room or something. And so we surrounded ourselves with mats to try to cut down on the echo and created our own little sound booth there with AJ.
Did you have thoughts of turning it into an interview podcast or doing the kind of interviews that you're doing now before that? Or did that interview kind of make it click? Like,
yeah,
hey.
It wasn't supposed to be reputable at all. It wasn't supposed to be anything that anybody was interested in listening to. It was just mostly to be therapeutic and something our dads would get a kick out of. But then Eric is really good at wrangling this talent, and suddenly we had to start, putting in real effort, doing some research, doing some homework, and being like, and after a few of them, I think we kind of realized we're getting an opportunity here to have a oral history of the program.
Yeah.
And a level of depth, I'm sure you guys read like the Bob Hamill books and, a few other of the novel, Season on the Brink type Indiana books that have come up over the years. But there's just no resource where you can go talk to a lot of our favorite players in the program's history, go deep for a couple of hours. That book doesn't exist. That podcast did not exist.
No, and the truth is that Jerod and Andy and what you guys do, you do it so well that when Ward and I started thinking about like what we were doing and talking about the game against Jacksonville State or whoever it was, we're like, we're not really bringing anything that new to that world. You guys are the gold standard in breaking down the games. We listen to you after every game, and we didn't want to duplicate what you're doing or trying to replicate it. We don't. I think Ward and I would both admit we have just a fraction of the actual basketball knowledge that you guys have.
Yeah. Acumen is at a minimum around here.
A real minimum. But what we lack in acumen, we make up for in total ridiculousness. And we thought once that AJ Moye interview happened and then Jared Jeffries happened right after that, they both lived in LA. It just felt right. And I'll be honest, Jared, you were so kind in supporting those interviews at the beginning with your tweets. That got them some traction. And Ward and I just said to each other, I think we got to just focus on these things. And it was really fun for us. It is just an absolute joy to do them.
Well, I mean, you could just tell, from the first listen. I mean, you guys have a real knack for getting people to open up. And really just getting the interviews at all, because I mean, we've tried to book some interviews on Podcast on the Brink and, haven't been able to book some of the guests that you guys have, and being able to get people to open up and get that level of insight is awesome. And really, it's interesting what you said about doing something different. Cause I think from when our show started, it's, it's a lesson that anybody who's trying to build an audience or put content out there, should take to heart. You got to be different, and you got to position yourself in a way that no one else is. And even if you don't have a lot of experience, you can still get noticed, and that's one of the reasons why we did a post-game show, because no one was really doing it. And, same thing with, with what you guys are doing with the interviews. I mean, it's such a breath of fresh air and something that was so needed. So yeah,
our initial hook was just to be the obnoxious ones. And, I think it was really,
well, Ryan has that cornered, doesn't he? I mean,
although Jared, you were really kind, Jared, at the beginning, because in some of our podcasts at the very beginning, when they didn't include interviews where we were obnoxious, no doubt, you were very kind in the diplomatic way you handled that stuff versus the interviews that were a little bit more palatable.
That's right. From our first interaction, you might never have expected that we would be on the same show at some point. But, it's like anything else, though. Rather than spouting off just publicly on Twitter, when you talk directly with somebody, you get to know them and understand them. Usually you come together and find common ground and realize you have a heck of a lot more in common than you do different. So
I also have to say, I mean, I know it's silly and sounds trite, but Indiana is special. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles, and last night I was with my girlfriend on a street. We had some ice cream, and a woman walks by, a few years younger than me, with her husband. She sees that I'm wearing an IU hoodie, immediately screams out, IU! That led to a 25, 30-minute conversation on the side of the street. We exchanged numbers. We're going to get together for breakfast.
She's going to be on the podcast.
Yeah, sure. She's our executive producer. And it's just the connection that IU has amongst fans. It exists amongst the former players, too. We just talked to John Laskowski, and he played in 1972 to 1975. You would think on the surface there's very little in common with us, but that Indiana bond is special. And we have found through all of our interviews, they just love talking about their time at Indiana, whether it was Kent Benson and John Laskowski, or Cody Zeller, or Jawan Morgan, or Armand Franklin and Trace Jackson Davis and Joey Brunk talking about what will be. IU is special, and it has just been a joy to kind of explore that with all these people that are connected by that similar bond.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to AC Extra. Don't forget to go to assemblycall.com and sign up for the newsletter. Also, go on over to YouTube and subscribe and hit that notification bell. And as always, go Hoosiers.